Welcome to Bedtime Science. Tonight we explore the deep past, a time when every sunrise was earned, every meal was a small victory, and the stars above were the only ceiling most humans ever knew. We're going far back tonight, not to the cartoon version of prehistory, not to the grunting figures dragging clubs through the mud that you might remember from old textbooks. Tonight we visit the real story, the one etched in bones, the one preserved in seeds, the one traced in the faint residue of ochre on a grinding stone that hasn't been touched in 23,000 years. And it is a quieter story than you might expect. Before we begin our journey, here are a few things you may not have known. At a 23,000-year-old campsite called Ohalo II, on the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee in Israel, archaeologists recovered over 150,000 plant remains from more than 140 different species. Wild wheat, barley, oats, almonds, pistachios, figs, grapes, raspberries. The evidence tells us that so-called cavemen ate a more varied diet than most modern adults manage today. Or consider this: a 50,000-year-old bone-sewing needle, crafted not by Homo sapiens but by Denisovans, a separate human species, had an eye so precise it could thread animal sinew for tailored winter clothing. The head of the excavation team said it is still usable today. Or that the skeletal injuries found on Upper Paleolithic hunters match the injury patterns seen in professional rodeo athletes. Broken ribs, fractured forearms, healed skull fractures from close encounters with large, fast-moving animals. These weren't primitive people stumbling through the dark. They were us, just earlier. Tonight, we will gently explore 100 quiet facts about the real lives of prehistoric people. We will find out what they actually ate, gathered, and stored across the seasons. We will look at the tools, shelters, and clothing they built with surprising precision. We will learn about the injuries they survived, the art they left behind, and the social bonds that held small bands of humans together across tens of thousands of years. And somewhere along the way, we will discover how much of their world still lives inside your body tonight. Before we begin, if you find comfort here tonight, please consider subscribing to join our quiet community. Or, if you are still awake, leave a soft comment below about what forgotten piece of human history we should explore next. Now, let's begin with food. Fact 1. The site of Ohalo II is one of the best preserved hunter-gatherer campsites ever discovered. It sits on the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and it dates to approximately 23,000 years ago, during the height of the last glacial maximum. The site came to light in 1989, when lake levels dropped dramatically, exposing what had been sealed underwater for millennia. Plant remains at the camp had been charred by ancient fires, then buried under lake sediment in low oxygen conditions. That combination preserved them almost perfectly. When excavators finally opened the ground, they found 6 brush hut dwellings, a human grave, stone tools, and beads that had been sourced from the Mediterranean Sea over 100 kilometers away. Fact 2. Among those hut floors, archaeologists recovered over 150,000 plant remains belonging to more than 140 different species. The list reads like a market stall from some forgotten world. Wild emmer wheat, wild barley, wild oats, acorns and almonds, pistachios, olives, figs, grapes, and raspberries. 13 species of proto-weeds were also found, ancestral forms of the plants that still grow in modern cultivated fields today. Their presence suggests that these people were already disturbing the soil through repeated gathering and possibly early tending. roughly 11,000 years before anyone invented formal agriculture. Fact 3. A large flat grinding stone at Ohalo II bore traces of starch from wheat, barley, and oats. This is the earliest known evidence of systematic grinding of wild cereals anywhere in the world. The cereals were not merely plucked from stalks and chewed raw. They were harvested, carried back to the huts, processed on a dedicated stone, and cooked into early forms of gruel or flatbread. 23,000 years ago, on the edge of a glacial lake, someone was already baking. Fact 4. The animal record at Ohalo II is just as rich as the plant record. More than 20,000 animal remains have been analyzed from successive hut floors. Reptiles, birds, mammals, small freshwater fish from the carp family dominate the bone assemblage, pulled from the nearby Sea of Galilee. Foxes and hares were likely taken for their pelts, tortoises for shells and meat. The combination of so many different prey sources suggests that climate fluctuations at the time brought new opportunities, not just hardship. Fact 5. Bird bones at Ohalo II function as a precise seasonal calendar. A total of 488 identifiable bird bone fragments from 68 different species across 16 families were recovered from the site. Because bird migration patterns are well documented, ornithologists can read the species composition as a seasonal signature. The dominant species, waterfowl, grebes, and raptors, are consistent with human occupation during September through November and again from February through April. Fact 6. But several bird species found at the site only appear in the Galilee region between December and March. Their bones in the hut floors suggest that at least some people overwintered at Ohalo II. This makes it not a brief seasonal stop, but a semi-permanent lakeside base. Archaeologists interpret this as an early sign of reduced nomadism, one of the first ecological steps towards settled life, roughly 10,000 years before anyone built a village. Fact 7. Seeds found concentrated around grinding stones and hearths inside the brush huts show deliberate processing. Grinding, roasting, not casual snacking. Plant foods weren't a fallback when hunting failed. They were planned and central. The ripening times of identified plants indicate occupation across multiple seasons. Wild barley ripened in spring. Bramble seeds came in summer. Acorns and nuts arrived in autumn. Fact 8. Delicate raspberry seeds were found preserved in the hut floor sediment. Raspberries bruise within hours. Their seeds at the site suggest either fresh consumption very close to the gathering point or intentional drying for later storage. Either way, these were people who understood the timing of their local environment down to the week. They knew which plants ripened when, and they returned to the same spots each year to collect them. Fact 9. Different hut floors at Ohalo II appear to represent winter versus summer use. The spatial distribution of food remains shifts between floors, with cold season species concentrated in certain layers and warm season plants in others. This pattern of repeated seasonal return to the same campsite over years, possibly over generations, mirrors the behavior of modern semi-nomadic peoples. Home, even 23,000 years ago, was a place you came back to. Fact 10. On the floor of one brush hut, archaeologists found bundled grass stems and leaves arranged in a pattern around the central hearth. These bunches of Puccinalia grass had been deliberately laid on a cleaned, compact clay floor. The grass formed a defined resting and working area. This is among the oldest in-context bedding ever discovered. The hut contained a hearth at the center, task-specific work areas for tool making and food processing, and a comfortable resting area near the walls. That spatial layout mirrors what you'd find in documented shelters of modern hunter-gatherers. It was a home. Fact 11. At Border Cave in South Africa, grass bedding has been found that dates back approximately 200,000 years. Tiny rounded grains of red and orange ochre were embedded directly within the grass. The pigment had rubbed off from human skin or from ochre-coated objects while people rested. 200,000 years ago, someone lay down in gathered grass, their skin still marked with color, and the traces of that moment survived into the present. Fact 12. The megafauna hunted during the Upper Paleolithic included aurochs, bison, horses, and reindeer. Bone marrow extraction marks on recovered animal bones show that nothing was wasted. Long bones were cracked open and the marrow inside scraped clean. Marrow is dense in calories and fat, a critical resource during cold months when lean meat alone couldn't sustain a human body. The practice of extracting marrow appears consistently across sites, spanning tens of thousands of years on multiple continents. Fact 13. Fishing at Ohalo II was not casual or accidental. The density and diversity of fish bones in the hut floors point to sustained, organized fishing, likely using nets, traps, or woven barriers placed across shallow channels. The fish species present are small freshwater varieties that school near shorelines. They could be caught in large numbers with basic woven technology. This wasn't supplemental food, it was a staple. Fact 14. The overall picture from Ohalo II and comparable Paleolithic sites is one of dietary diversity far beyond what popular images of the caveman suggest. 140 plant species, dozens of animal species, fish, birds, nuts, seeds, grains, fruit. The people living at the shore of the Sea of Galilee 23,000 years ago had access to a wider range of foods than most people living in industrialized countries eat in any given year. These first facts describe what went into a prehistoric meal: the seeds, the fish, the ground grain, but food is only one part of daily life. The next group of facts looks at what they built and how precise that work really was. Fact 15. The oldest known stone tools date to approximately 3.3 million years ago. These earliest tools, called lomquian, were crude, heavy, and effective mostly for smashing open bones or breaking tough plant material. Over hundreds of thousands of years, tool-making progressed to Alduin choppers, then to the symmetrical Acheulean hand axes, and eventually to the fine Mousterian points of the Neanderthals. Each technological leap took an almost incomprehensible span of time. The transition from Alduin to Acheulean alone lasted roughly 1,000,000 years. That's 5,000 times longer than the entire history of written language. Fact 16. Stone tools found in central Iberia during Upper Paleolithic excavations were made from chert that had been sourced from outcrops in southwestern France, a straight-line distance of roughly 1,000 kilometers. This is the longest confirmed distance between a tool's stone source and its final discard location in the entire European Upper Paleolithic. Geochemical analysis traced the stone to specific French outcrops. These long-distance connections were maintained for at least 1,400 years, across the Middle Solutrean period. Fact 17. Researchers interpret those long-distance stone connections as deliberate risk buffering networks. When one region suffered a bad season, bands could call on social obligations with distant groups who had surplus. Think of it as the earliest known form of mutual aid. Relationships maintained across hundreds of kilometers, passed down through generations, so that no one group faced starvation alone. Fact 18. The earliest well-documented evidence for habitual, repeated use of controlled fire comes from Cavemen Cave, located in the limestone hills east of Tel Aviv. The cave was occupied from approximately 420,000 to 200,000 years ago. Fire appears throughout its entire record. A central hearth discovered there, dating to around 300,000 years ago, measures approximately 4 square meters, larger than any other fire site known from that era. It shows repeated reconstruction in the same location, layer after layer of ash, one on top of the other. Fact 19. Butchered animal bones cluster around the Cavemen hearth. Surrounding stone tools are spatially organized into distinct activity zones, areas for meat processing, for hide working, for communal eating. Burned bones from the site show heat exposures reaching 500 degrees Celsius, consistent with deliberate cooking rather than accidental burning. Archaeologist Ran Barkai of Tel Aviv University described the hearth as evidence of two very human phenomena, bringing home and roasting meat, that for us seem natural but really are not. Fire at Cavemen was a managed technology, maintained for over 200,000 years. Fact 20. Cooking had consequences far beyond taste. Cooking breaks down fibrous plant cell walls, denatures proteins, kills pathogens, and dramatically increases the caloric yield of food. Your brain consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy, despite being only 2% of its mass. Some researchers argue that cooking may have been one of the key innovations that allowed brain expansion in our lineage. More calories extracted per meal meant more energy available for a larger, hungrier brain. Fact 21. At a site called Jesher Benat Yaakov in Israel, the earliest evidence of cooking has been dated to approximately 780,000 years ago. That pushes the mastery of fire and heat-based food preparation deep into the time of Homo erectus. By the time anatomically modern humans appeared around 300,000 years ago, fire had already been a companion of the human lineage for nearly 500,000 years. Fact 22. In 2016, excavators working in Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia unearthed the oldest known sewing needle. It is 7 centimeters long, about 2.75 inches, crafted from the wing bone of a large bird. At one end, a precisely drilled eye allows for the threading of animal sinew. The needle dates to approximately 50,000 years ago. Mikhail Shunkov, head of the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography in Novosibirsk, said it is still usable today. Fact 23. The needle was found in a sediment layer associated with Denisovan remains, not Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals, a third human species known almost entirely from DNA and a handful of bone fragments. Denisova Cave is the only known site where all three of these lineages, Denisovans, Neanderthals, and early Homo sapiens, have been confirmed to have lived. The needle predates all previously known needles by 10,000 years. Fact 24. The existence of that needle tells us something very specific. Eyed needles mark the transition from draped animal skins to fitted, multi-layer garments stitched from separate pieces. Fitted clothing allowed permanent human occupation of extreme cold environments. It wasn't biological adaptation that let our relatives survive Siberian winters. It was technology, dress as survival equipment. The Denisovans were tailoring clothes 50,000 years ago. Fact 25. The broader record of hideworking tools extends even further back. At Schöningen in northern Germany, cave bear bones dated to approximately 300,000 years ago bear distinctive cut marks on the paw bones. the precise locations where skinning an animal requires cutting close to the bone, with very little underlying meat. This is among the earliest direct evidence of humans processing animal fur. At a Moroccan site dated between 90,000 and 120,000 years ago, 62 bone tools carefully shaped for hide scraping and fur cleaning were uncovered. These implements are visually indistinguishable from tools used by modern leather workers. Fact 26. The brush huts at Ohalo II had walls weighted with stones. Their floors were carefully prepared clay. Their central hearths were maintained and rebuilt. These are among the oldest known constructed shelters. Not caves, not rock overhangs, but actual buildings. Small buildings, light buildings, but built deliberately with chosen materials. The idea that prehistoric people just found shelter in existing caves misses a large part of the story. Many of them built their own. Fact 27. A wood fire sits at the warm end of the visible spectrum, dominated by red, orange, and amber wavelengths. It produces almost no blue light. This matters for human biology. The cells in your eye responsible for regulating melatonin, the hormone that governs the body's transition toward rest, are maximally sensitive to blue wavelengths, between 446 and 477 nanometers. A campfire emits almost nothing in that band. Hours spent gazing into firelight in the evening left the pineal gland free to begin its nightly melatonin release without interruption. Fact 28. Researchers at the University of Colorado at Boulder confirmed this directly. After just 1 week of living without any artificial light, using only daylight and firelight, participants' internal circadian clocks advanced by approximately 2 hours. Melatonin onset aligned closely with sunset. People who normally stayed up late showed even larger shifts. The evening fire wasn't merely harmless to the body's rest cycle. It was actively compatible with it, in a way that modern electric light is not. With warmth and shelter established, and tools growing more precise with each passing millennium, the evidence now turns to a different kind of record. The injuries that prehistoric people endured, and what those injuries tell us about the lives behind them. Fact 29. In 1995, paleoanthropologists Thomas Berger and Eric Trinkhaus published a study comparing skeletal fractures found in Neanderthal fossils to injury patterns in modern populations. They found something striking. Neanderthal injuries were concentrated in the head, face, and upper body. Lower limb fractures were comparatively rare. The closest modern parallel, Berger and Trinkhaus argued, was the injury pattern seen in professional rodeo riders, athletes who engage in close physical contact with large, fast-moving animals. Fact 30. The hypothesis was direct. Neanderthals hunted by close-quarters ambush, jabbing heavy thrusting spears into large prey from within striking distance. They weren't throwing weapons from a safe perch. They were right there, close enough to be kicked, gored, thrown. The injuries on their bones tell a story of repeated, violent contact with bison, aurochs, horses. Fact 31. Trinkhaus himself later revisited that conclusion. When he examined injury patterns in Upper Paleolithic Homo sapiens, people who did use projectile weapons, he found statistically the same distribution. Heavy upper body trauma, light lower limb injury. A 2019 study led by Libby Cowgill of the University of Missouri compared Neanderthal fracture patterns to the U.S. National Electronic Injury Surveillance System database and found, oddly enough, that water tubing accidents and even table-related mishaps better matched the Neanderthal distribution than rodeo injuries. About 30% of Neanderthal trauma is found on the face and head, a rate lower than most modern high-contact sports. Fact 32. The takeaway from decades of study is this: Paleolithic humans lived hard lives in frequent physical contact with large animals and rough terrain. Their bones carry the record. But here's what matters: so do the healed fractures. Injuries that required weeks of recovery. Injuries during which someone else provided food, water, protection. Somebody stayed. Fact 33. The anthropologist Margaret Mead was once asked by a student what she considered the first sign of civilization. She didn't mention clay pots, tools, or cave art. She said, "A healed femur. The femur is your body's longest bone. It takes approximately 6 weeks to heal." In a world without modern medicine, a person with a fractured femur could not run, hunt, gather food, or defend themselves. A healed femur means someone chose to stay. Someone bound the wound, carried the person to safety, and tended them through weeks of recovery. Fact 34. That pattern, healed fractures that would have been immediately incapacitating, repeats across the Paleolithic record. At Krapina in Croatia, at Shanidar in Iraq, at dozens of Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens sites, individuals show mended ribs, forearms, vertebrae, and skulls. A recent paper argues that traumatology, the organized care of traumatic injury, may have been the earliest form of organized medical practice. These healed bones reflect not only biological responses, but also social behaviors involving support and redistribution of tasks within the group. Fact 35. Among the most studied examples of Paleolithic care is a Neanderthal known as Shanidar I. His remains were excavated from Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan beginning in 1957. The skeleton tells a harrowing life story. He sustained a severe blow to the left side of his face, fracturing the eye socket. His right arm was fractured and later lost at the elbow, possibly the oldest known surgical amputation. He had injuries to his right leg that caused a pronounced limp. Degenerative joint disease affected multiple regions of his skeleton. Fact 36. And then there was his hearing. A 2017 reanalysis confirmed that bony growths in both of Shanidar I's ear canals had caused profound hearing loss. In the Pleistocene environment, deafness was not merely inconvenient. As Trinkaus noted, his deafness would have made him easy prey for the carnivores in his environment and entirely dependent on other members of his social group for survival. Yet Shanidar I lived to an estimated age of 40 to 50 years. Elderly by Neanderthal standards. Fact 37. The sustained healing of Shanidar I's multiple injuries implies that he was fed, protected, and socially integrated across years. A bioarchaeological analysis applying modern care assessment methods concluded that he received both direct support, physical care during injury, and accommodation of a changed social role. His group restructured itself around him. He wasn't abandoned. He was carried. Fact 38. Musculoskeletal stress markers across many Upper Paleolithic skeletons show pronounced muscle attachment sites on the shoulders, arms, and upper spine. These reflect intense spear use, overhead throwing, heavy carrying, and close quarters physical effort. The bodies of these people were shaped by labor in a way few modern bodies are. Their bones grew thicker and stronger at the points where muscle pulled hardest. You can read their daily work in the ridges of their arm bones. Fact 39. Degenerative joint changes in Paleolithic skeletons are consistent with heavy, repetitive loading rather than light endurance walking alone. Knees, hips, shoulders, lower spines all show wear patterns that speak of decades of carrying, lifting, grinding, scraping. These were not gentle lives, but they were long enough for the wear to accumulate, which means many of these people lived well into middle age despite the strain. Fact 40. Prehistoric dental wear tells its own story. Teeth worn flat from grinding tough plant fibers. Grooves in the enamel from using teeth as tools, holding sinew, stripping bark, softening hides. At Krapina, a Neanderthal who lived around 130,000 years ago had an impacted molar. The individual scratched and prodded so persistently with a toothpick, probably a stiff piece of grass or bone fragment, that the pick left grooves and fine scratches on surrounding teeth. A modern dentist who studied the specimen recognized the pattern right away as pain-driven dental self-care. Fact 41. Toothpick use has been traced back as far as Homo habilis, approximately 1.8 million years ago. Repeated sideways scraping against tooth enamel produced characteristic grooves, most commonly on the lower premolars and molars. Paleoanthropologists can identify these marks clearly under a light microscope. The act of picking between your teeth may be one of the most ancient and persistent self-maintenance behaviors in human evolution. Nearly 2 million years of toothpicks. Fact 42. Evidence of trepanation, deliberate surgical opening of the skull, appears in the late Paleolithic and becomes more common in the Neolithic. Skulls with cleanly cut holes, their edges showing signs of healing and bone regrowth, demonstrate that patients survived the procedure. Someone decided to cut into a living person's skull, and that person lived afterward. Whatever the reason, pressure relief, ritual, or treatment of injury, this represents planned, sustained medical intervention performed without anesthesia, without metal tools, without antiseptic. And it worked often enough to be repeated. These injuries reveal something beyond pain and resilience. They reveal community. Someone was there, someone stayed. The next group of facts explores the social and emotional lives of prehistoric people, the bonds that held small bands together, and the traces of feeling they left behind in the earth. Fact 43. The core residential band in the Paleolithic, the people who shared a camp, pooled resources, and cooperated daily, typically numbered between 25 and 50 individuals. This estimate comes from both archaeological campsite evidence and ethnographic studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies. Modern hunter-gatherer camps average about 49 people, with a margin of roughly 22. Membership was fluid. People moved between bands. But at any given time, your world was made up of a few dozen people, and you knew every one of them personally. Fact 44. These small bands were embedded in much larger interaction networks. The stone tools sourced from over 1,000 kilometers away tell us that relationships extended far beyond the campfire. When one region suffered a bad season, bands could call on social obligations with distant groups. These weren't trade routes in the modern sense. They were bonds between people, maintained through gifts, visits, shared stories. In Western Europe, these networks persisted for at least 1,400 years across the Solutrean period. Fact 45. Isotopic evidence from Portuguese Paleolithic remains shows significant mobility. Middle Paleolithic individuals roamed subsistence territories of roughly 600 square kilometers. Upper Paleolithic individuals used smaller, more intensively managed territories of about 300 square kilometers. The reduction likely reflects higher population density rather than less movement overall. People didn't stop walking. They walked in tighter circles because more people surrounded them. Fact 46. Humans are the only great apes that extensively rely on non-mother caregivers to raise offspring. Grandparents, Siblings, aunts, uncles, community members all participated in child rearing. This pattern, called cooperative breeding, is now understood as a key evolutionary catalyst. A 2025 paper argues that extensive care from non-mothers preceded and likely enabled the evolution of larger brains. The dental evidence is specific. Weaning ages dropped first, made possible by shared childcare, and brain sizes expanded after. Fact 47. The consequences of cooperative breeding are far-reaching. Shorter birth intervals meant more children could survive. Stronger pro-social motivations developed, the impulse to help, to share, to cooperate without being asked. Shared intentionality emerged, the ability to work together toward a goal that both parties understand. That cognitive capacity is considered the foundation for language and for the accumulation of knowledge across generations. In practical terms, a Paleolithic infant was not raised by two parents alone. It was raised by a band. Fact 48. The first time a living creature placed a dead companion in a specific location with deliberate care was the beginning of something new in the history of life on Earth. At Homo naledi sites in South Africa's Rising Star Cave System, dated to between 241,000 and 335,000 years ago, small-brained hominin bodies were placed in sediment pits. Geometric cave engravings were found nearby. Whether this counts as formal burial is debated among researchers, but the deliberate placement of the dead is not. Fact 49. The story of flowers on Neanderthal graves became one of the most powerful images in 20th century archaeology. Ralph Solke's 1960 excavation of Shanidar 4, a 65,000-year-old Neanderthal skeleton surrounded by unusual concentrations of pollen, was interpreted as evidence of deliberate flower placement on the grave. The pollen matched 8 plant species. 7 of them have known medicinal properties. The concentration suggested not scattered drift, but intentional deposit. Fact 50. In 2023, a new study proposed an alternative explanation. Ground nesting bees were found to have drilled burrows near the Shanidar 4 skeleton. Ancient bee burrow traces were identified close to the skeleton's position. The mixed pollen clumps, the researchers argued, are more consistent with bees collecting and depositing pollen than with entire flowers being laid down by human hands. But here's the thing. The body was still there. The careful placement was still real. Whatever the bees did later doesn't change the fact that someone placed that person in that spot with intention. Fact 51. At a site called Sunghir on the Russian plain east of Moscow, hunter-gatherers began burying their dead approximately 34,000 years ago. An adult male, aged 35 to 45, was interred with roughly 3,000 individually drilled and polished mammoth ivory beads, fox canine pendants, ivory armbands. His body was coated in red ochre. Each bead would have taken time to carve and drill, 3,000 of them, bead by firelight. Fact 52. 2 children at Sunghir, approximately 10 and 12 years old, were buried head-to-head in an even more elaborate arrangement. A Moscow State University team described it as containing more adornments and burial items than any other Upper Paleolithic burial site in Eurasia. Study of the ivory beads found that many showed long-term wear patterns, pendants worn until their strings broke, beads rubbed smooth against skin over months or years. These were personal belongings. Loved objects. Fact 53. Other items in the Sunghir burials showed signs of hasty manufacture. They were crafted specifically for the ceremony. One clumsily made ivory disc in the children's grave appears to have been made by a child. A child made something for a child. and placed it in the ground with them. By 34,000 years ago, social identity, status, ceremony, and grief were already fully present in human life. Fact 54. The Sungir community gave the children their own things: the worn fox tooth pendant, the bead string rubbed smooth from daily use, and added new-made objects alongside them. Whatever those ancient people believed about what happened after death, they believed the children needed to be provisioned for it. That small ivory disc, clumsily shaped by small fingers, is perhaps the most human object in the entire archaeological record. Fact 55. Band sizes of 25 to 50 people meant that every death was felt. In a group that's small, every member is known personally. Every loss leaves a visible gap around the fire. The elaborate burials at Sungir were not the rituals of strangers honoring the abstract idea of death. They were the actions of people who had shared every meal with the ones they were burying. Fact 56. Professor Penny Spickens of the University of York noted that the evidence from sites like Rising Star Cave and Shanidar suggests emotional connections were formed hundreds of thousands of years before Homo sapiens appeared. The capacity for grief, for care, for attachment, these didn't arrive with our species. They were already there. We inherited them from people whose faces we will never see. From social bonds, we drift now toward one of the most mysterious legacies of the deep past: art, sound, symbol, and the inner life of people who left no written words, only marks on stone. Fact 57. Red ochre, iron-rich clay pigment ranging from yellow to deep red, has been found at human occupation sites dating back at least 300,000 years. Its earliest use may have been entirely functional. Mixed with animal fat, ochre formed a thick, greasy coating that served as UV protection, insect repellent, moisture barrier, and antibacterial layer all at once. Experimental studies have confirmed that red ochre possesses genuine photoprotective properties, capable of inhibiting ultraviolet radiation at the cellular level. Fact 58. But ochre was more than sunscreen. At Blombo's cave in South Africa, ochre processing toolkits dating to 70,000 to 90,000 years ago included grinding stones, shells used as mixing containers, and bone spatulas. This was deliberate multi-step preparation. At Cavemen cave in Israel, 92,000-year-old ochre associated with Homo sapiens burials was analyzed geochemically. The ochre had been selected for its color, not its practical properties. It met the definitional criteria for color symbolism. They chose it because it was red. Fact 59. In Crimea, Neanderthals were processing ochre into crayon-like tools 70,000 years ago. Some pieces show evidence of repeated resharpening, used not just practically but for marking surfaces or bodies with deliberate color. A 2025 study concluded that some Crimean Neanderthals selected ochre pieces with specific coloring properties, processed them methodically, and used them in ways that go beyond simple utility. Color had meaning long before cities existed, long before anyone built a wall to hang a painting on. Fact 60. Ochre residue has been found embedded in 200,000-year-old grass bedding at Border Cave in South Africa. The pigment had rubbed off from human skin while people rested. The image is quiet and specific. Someone whose body was marked with ochre, perhaps for protection, perhaps for beauty, perhaps for reasons we can't recover, lay down in gathered grass, and the traces of their skin stained the fibers. And those fibers survived for 200 millennia. Fact 61. Cave paintings at Chauvet in southern France date to approximately 36,000 years ago. The images depict lions, horses, rhinoceroses, bison, rendered with anatomical precision and implied motion. Some animals are drawn with multiple legs, suggesting movement. Others overlap, creating the impression of a herd flowing across the stone surface. These are not the crude scratchings of beginners. They are confident, skilled compositions made by people who had studied the bodies of animals with care. Fact 62. The paintings at Lascaux, also in France, date to roughly 17,000 years ago. Nearly 2,000 figures cover the walls. Animals, abstract signs, a single human figure. The Great Hall of the Bulls features aurochs over 5 meters long. The pigments were applied with fingers, with moss pads, with hollow bone tubes used to blow paint onto the surface. Some images were placed in locations reachable only by scaffolding. These painters climbed to reach the walls they wanted. Fact 63. In the summer of 2008, archaeologist Nicholas Kennard of the University of Tübingen discovered a nearly complete bone flute in Hohlfels Cave, in the Ache Valley of southwestern Germany. The preserved portion measures 21.8 centimeters long and about 8 millimeters in diameter. It has 5 finger holes and 2 deep V-shaped notches at one end to form a mouthpiece. Thin guidelines are carved near each finger hole, construction marks left by the maker. Radiocarbon dating places it at more than 35,000 years old. It is the oldest confirmed musical instrument ever recovered. Fact 64. The flute was made from the wing bone of a griffin vulture. Chosen for its hollow tubular structure, it didn't require the maker to hollow out a solid piece. The flute was found in 12 fragments scattered over a patch of sediment roughly 10 by 20 centimeters. It broke in place. It wasn't discarded. Researchers made a replica from a similar bone and played it. The instrument produced a range of notes comparable to those of many modern flutes. Fact 65. 3 other flute fragments were found at nearby Jason Clerstral Cave. 2 were made from mute swan bone. 1 was carved from woolly mammoth ivory. That ivory flute required far more preparation than a hollow bird bone. The craftsperson had to split a solid tusk, hollow the interior, shape a cylindrical tube, and rejoin the halves. This was a multi-day process requiring sustained concentration and fine motor control. Kennard wrote in Nature that these finds demonstrate a well-established musical tradition at the time when modern humans colonized Europe. Music wasn't an afterthought. It was part of the cultural package. Fact 66. Since the 1980s, French musicologist Igor Riznikov has been singing inside Paleolithic painted caves, following the resonance of his own voice. His systematic studies of multiple French caves yielded a consistent result. The more acoustically resonant a location within a cave, where sound lasted longest, where echoes were most pronounced, the more paintings and signs were found there. The walls that sang were the walls that were painted. Fact 67. The Art Soundscapes Project, a 7-year European Research Council investigation led by researchers at the University of Barcelona, extended Riznikov's findings. They measured the acoustic fingerprints of painted rock art sites worldwide, generating 3-dimensional maps of sound behavior. At the Valtorta Gorge in eastern Spain, the lead researcher reported that before reaching the paintings, there was hardly any reverberation. But as soon as she arrived at the artwork, the sound shifted dramatically. Rupert Till of the University of Huddersfield described it more directly. If you sing, the cave responds. Fact 68. The project's publications confirm that ancient artists appear to have intentionally sought locations where echoes, resonance, and sound transmission generated unusual auditory effects. A related paper examined the neurobiology of altered states of consciousness induced by drumming and rhythmic sound. The acoustic properties of painted caves may have been used to induce trance during ritual. Picture it. A small group, deep underground, firelight throwing animal shapes across resonant stone walls, while someone plays a bone flute. The cave itself becomes part of the instrument. Fact 69. One caveat to the acoustic correlation. Paintings on porous stone don't preserve well, and porous stone doesn't resonate. The correlation may partly reflect preservation bias. We can't know how many paintings were made on surfaces that didn't echo and were later lost. But the consistency of the pattern across dozens of caves on multiple continents makes the idea of deliberate acoustic selection hard to dismiss. Fact 70. Carved Venus figurines have been found across Europe, from southwestern France to the Russian plain, spanning a period from approximately 40,000 to 11,000 years ago. Despite enormous geographic distances and many thousands of years separating them, these small figures share recognizable features: exaggerated breasts, hips, and abdomen, with faces and feet often left undetailed. This represents a shared symbolic tradition spanning thousands of miles. Whatever these figures meant, the idea behind them traveled and persisted for nearly 30,000 years. These marks, melodies, and painted walls suggest an inner life of real depth. People who made music from vulture bones and chose resonant chambers for their most important images were not living in a world without meaning. Now we look at how prehistoric people navigated and understood the world around them, how they read the seasons, how they moved through open country, and how they responded to a changing climate. Fact 71. Migration patterns of Paleolithic peoples have been traced through isotope analysis of their teeth and bones. The chemical signatures locked in tooth enamel during childhood record the geology and water chemistry of the areas where a person grew up. By comparing these signatures to the geology of the site where the skeleton was found, researchers can measure how far people moved during their lifetimes. Some individuals traveled hundreds of kilometers between childhood and death. Fact 72. Isotopic evidence from Portuguese Paleolithic remains paints a specific picture. Middle Paleolithic individuals roamed territories of roughly 600 square kilometers. Upper Paleolithic individuals used smaller territories of about 300 square kilometers. These weren't aimless wanderings. They were structured seasonal movements, north in summer, south in winter, to the river during dry months, to the high ground when the water rose. Fact 73. The Pleistocene climate was not static. Ice ages, periods of massive glacial expansion, alternated with warmer interglacial periods. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, ice sheets covered much of northern Europe and North America. Sea levels dropped by as much as 120 meters, exposing vast stretches of land now underwater. Humans adapted to both warm and cold phases by shifting food sources, shelter types, and migration routes. Fact 74. Coastal migration evidence from shell middens and seaside campsites demonstrates that early humans were not exclusively inland hunters. Shorelines provided shellfish, seaweed, fish, and seabirds, reliable food sources that didn't require the energy expenditure or risk of large animal hunting. Some researchers have proposed a coastal migration route out of Africa, following shorelines around the Indian Ocean to Southeast Asia and eventually to Australia. Those shorelines are now submerged under 120 meters of risen seawater, making direct evidence difficult to recover. Fact 75. The seasonal animal depictions in cave paintings, bison with summer coats, horses with winter fur, deer with specific antler configurations that correspond to particular months, suggest that prehistoric artists were recording seasonal knowledge on the walls. Some researchers have proposed that these images functioned as calendars or instructional records. Others see them as something less systematic but equally important: the visual expression of a deep, embodied understanding of the annual cycle. Fact 76. A 2023 study proposed that certain dot patterns and line sequences found alongside cave paintings at multiple European sites represent a proto-writing system, a method of recording the breeding seasons of the animals depicted. The researchers matched the number of marks to the lunar months of known gestation periods for aurochs, bison, and horse. The hypothesis remains debated, but the marks are there, repeated at sites separated by thousands of kilometers. Something was being recorded. Fact 77. Beads sourced from the Mediterranean Sea were found at Ohalo II, over 100 kilometers from the coast. These beads arrived at the lakeside camp either through trade or through the direct movement of people across considerable distances. Either way, they demonstrate that Paleolithic people maintained connections far beyond their immediate territory. The beads were decorative, small, drilled, worn as ornaments. Objects of beauty traveled alongside practical knowledge. Fact 78. Modern hunter-gatherer groups who live without artificial light tend to synchronize their activity cycles with the natural light cycle far more tightly than industrialized populations. They rise near dawn, are most active in the morning, and begin winding down as the afternoon light shifts toward amber. The transition from daylight to firelight at dusk is not a sharp boundary, but a slow, extended dimming, a gradient that the human circadian system evolved to follow. Fact 79. The orange and blue hues of a natural sky at dusk, the same spectral conditions under which Paleolithic humans transitioned from daylight to firelight, appear to serve as a powerful circadian timing cue. Research from the University of Washington found that these specific color combinations activate retinal circuits that advance melatonin production. Fire's warm spectrum slots naturally into the sequence that the evening sky begins. For hundreds of thousands of years, every evening brought the same gentle transition: blue sky fading to orange, then the amber glow of flames, then darkness. Fact 80. Climate shifts during the Pleistocene didn't just change temperatures, they changed entire ecosystems. Grasslands replaced forests, forests replaced tundra, rivers shifted course, lakes appeared and vanished. Animal populations migrated north, south to higher ground, and humans followed or adapted in place, switching from one set of food sources to another as the world around them transformed over centuries. Fact 81. The concept of seasonal return, coming back to the same campsite each year, appears repeatedly in the Paleolithic record. Ohalo II shows it. Sites across Europe and the Levant show layered occupation floors stacked one atop another, each representing a different visit. These places were remembered. Knowledge of their location, their resources, their water sources was passed down. Some campsites were used for thousands of years. Fact 82. Navigation across large territories without maps, compasses, or roads required a different kind of spatial knowledge than we use today. Landmarks, mountains, rivers, specific rock formations, particular trees served as waypoints. Stars served as direction markers. The position of the sun at different times of year indicated season and latitude. This knowledge was accumulated over lifetimes and transmitted through stories, songs, and direct instruction from elders to children. Fact 83. The persistence of long-distance exchange networks across the Solutrean period, maintained for at least 1,400 years, implies that navigational knowledge was stable and transmissible. People didn't just know where they were. They knew where other groups were. They knew the routes between them. And they passed that information to the next generation with enough fidelity that it lasted for over a millennium. Fact 84. Shell middens, the accumulated refuse heaps of shellfish meals, found along ancient coastlines serve as records of tidal knowledge. The species composition within a midden can reveal which tides were being exploited, at what time of year, and with what frequency. Coastal Paleolithic peoples understood tidal cycles well enough to plan harvesting trips around the optimal exposure of intertidal zones. They read the ocean the way inland peoples read the ripening of fruit. These patterns of movement and adaptation bring us to the final group of facts: the biological legacy that prehistoric life left inside our modern bodies. Because the body you carry tonight was shaped by those ancient environments, those ancient seasons, those long walks across open country in search of food. Fact 85. The human stress response, the cascade of cortisol, adrenaline, and accelerated heart rate triggered by perceived threat, is not a malfunction. It is a refined Pleistocene survival system. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, can detect and respond to danger in as little as 1/50th of a second. That's far faster than conscious awareness, which operates roughly 10 times slower. When the amygdala fires, it suppresses the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, ensuring that action precedes deliberation. In a world of predators, that speed saved lives. Fact 86. In the Pleistocene, this system responded to physical threats, predators, rival groups, unstable terrain at night. Evolution then repurposed the same neural machinery to respond to social threats: public failure, exclusion from the group, loss of status. In a band of 25 to 50 people, social rejection was functionally equivalent to death. You couldn't survive alone. Being cast out meant no shared food, no shared fire, no protection while resting. Modern humans now experience traffic delays and missed deadlines through the same neurobiological systems that once tracked approaching predators at the edge of the firelight. Fact 87. The autonomic nervous system operates as a seesaw between two states. The sympathetic branch accelerates the heart, dilates pupils, floods the bloodstream with energy. The parasympathetic branch slows the heart, constricts pupils, promotes digestion and rest. These two systems are biological hardware shaped by tens of thousands of years of alternating between high-alert foraging and quiet recovery at the camp. The problem in the modern world is that the sympathetic branch stays activated far longer than it was designed to. The seesaw gets stuck. Fact 88. The human brain's dopamine reward system is a Paleolithic artifact operating in a post-industrial world. Dopamine is released when the brain anticipates reward, when it detects a cue associated with food, social connection, or novel information. In the context of Paleolithic foraging, dopamine drove people toward high-calorie foods, sweet and fatty, during the brief windows when these were available. It promoted fat storage against the inevitable lean seasons ahead. Fact 89. Harvard evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman described the situation with precision. Sugar, he said, is a deep, deep ancient craving. A genetic mutation approximately 15 million years ago increased primate sensitivity to fructose, enabling fat storage even from small quantities of sweet food. That adaptation saved lives during glacial food scarcity. The same biological drive that once helped our ancestors survive winter now leads to compulsive consumption of processed sugar. The craving hasn't changed. The availability has. Fact 90. The dopamine architecture that drove ancestral foragers toward ripe fruit now drives compulsive behavior around screens, processed food, and engineered stimulation. Evolutionary biologists call this an evolutionary mismatch. Traits that were adaptive in the Pleistocene have become maladaptive in an environment of unlimited sugar and constant digital reward signals. Your body is still running Paleolithic software. The hardware it operates on has changed beyond recognition. Fact 91. Human rest patterns differ from those of all other primates in two measurable ways. Humans rest for less total time than any other primate studied. Yet humans have the highest proportion of REM, rapid eye movement, among all primates. This unusual profile is thought to reflect the transition from tree resting to ground resting in our lineage. Our great ape relatives build nests in trees each night. When early hominins descended to the ground, the need for constant light vigilance decreased, and the brain invested more heavily in deep processing stages. Fact 92. Ground resting increased investment in slow-wave deep processing and REM at the expense of lighter stages, which had functioned partly as a vigilance buffer against predation. The result was a shorter total rest time, dangerous on the ground, but richer cognitive processing. This is the neurological substrate for memory consolidation, learning, and vivid dreaming. The move to the ground didn't just change where our ancestors rested. It changed what their brains could accomplish while resting. Fact 93. Historian Roger Eckert's landmark research, beginning in 2001, identified a pattern he called segmented or biphasic rest. Pre-industrial humans characteristically rested in two distinct episodes, separated by an hour or two of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. Eckert documented more than 2,000 references to this first rest and second rest pattern in a dozen languages, reaching back to ancient Greece and Homer's Odyssey. This wasn't insomnia, it was the default. Fact 94. NIH researcher Thomas Weyer confirmed this pattern experimentally. When subjects were deprived of artificial lighting for several weeks, they naturally evolved a new pattern. 4 hours of rest, then 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness, then a second period of rest before dawn. This waking interval was characterized by elevated prolactin levels, a hormonal state associated with calm, meditative awareness rather than anxious arousal. The continuous 8-hour block that modern culture treats as normal is an artifact of electric lighting and industrial schedules, not biology. Fact 95. Anthropologist Christopher Dana Lynn of the University of Alabama conducted 3 studies involving 226 participants, exposing them to simulated fire conditions while measuring blood pressure. The results were consistent. Blood pressure decreased in the presence of fire with sound. The effect strengthened the longer the exposure lasted. And it was strongest in individuals who scored higher on measures of absorption, the capacity for focused, immersive attention and prosociality. Fact 96. Here's the critical detail. Fire without sound, muted fire, just the visual flicker, did not produce the same effect. It was the crackling that mattered. The irregular, non-threatening acoustic pattern of a fire was as important as the visual flickering in triggering the relaxation response. Lynn proposed that the hearth gradually shaped the social brain of Homo sapiens over hundreds of thousands of years, nudging human nervous systems toward a calmer, more cooperative baseline. The campfire may have been the world's first dedicated relaxation technology. Fact 97. Beyond its warm spectrum, a wood fire also emits significant far-infrared radiation. Research has identified that far-infrared wavelengths of 8 to 10 micrometers, which a wood fire produces abundantly, have biologically meaningful effects independent of simple heating. These include improved blood vessel function and enhanced nitric oxide synthesis. Some researchers have proposed that modern populations may suffer from a degree of what they call infrared deprivation, lacking the nightly dose of radiant heat that ancestral hearths once provided. Fact 98. The fire-staring state isn't trivial. The absorption measured in lens studies, a form of focused, non-evaluative attention, is neurologically close to the default mode network activity associated with daydreaming and memory consolidation. Extended fireside storytelling, documented in modern hunter-gatherer groups by researcher Polly Wiesner of the University of Utah, functioned as the primary vehicle for transmitting cultural knowledge, social norms, and the rich imagined worlds that distinguish our species. The hearth was simultaneously a kitchen, a nervous system regulator, a social forum, and an incubator of narrative imagination. It was where stories were born. Fact 99. Ochre mixed with animal fat served as the earliest known skincare product. Indigenous Australians historically called this preparation wilgi. It functioned simultaneously as a UV protectant, a humectant reducing moisture loss in heat, an insulator in cold weather, and an antibacterial coating. People were caring for their skin with multi-purpose formulations 100,000 years ago. The ingredients were different. The impulse was the same one that fills bathroom shelves today. Fact 100. The genetic divergence between the dog's wolf ancestor and modern wolves is estimated at approximately 27,000 to 40,000 years ago, during the Upper Paleolithic. The first undisputed archaeological dog is the Bon Ober Castle burial, dated to about 14,200 years ago, where a dog was interred alongside two humans in a deliberate joint grave. The human-wolf bond began because both species are cooperative hunters operating in family groups. Both read social signals. Both benefit from shared vigilance at night. Wolves that were less fearful and more cooperative received extra food and proximity to warmth. Over generations, the behavioral shift toward domestication began. On a remote Swedish island with no native land mammals, archaeologists found ancient wolf remains that could only have been brought there by humans, evidence of deliberate transport and care. Wolves rest in communal piles for warmth. A wolf body pressed against a human body beside a dying fire may be one of the oldest forms of comfort between two different species. And now, we've reached the end of our 100 facts. But before we close, let's widen the view for a moment. Every bone fragment, every seed cluster, every painted wall we've visited tonight tells the same story. Small groups of people finding ways to endure, finding ways to care for each other, finding ways to leave something behind. A bead, a painted horse, a carefully placed body in a cave. The entire span of recorded history, every city, every book, every satellite, fits inside the last 1% of the time humans have walked on this planet. The other 99% was lived by people whose names no one will ever know. They rested under the same constellations visible tonight. They watched the same moon cross the same sky. The body listening to these words carries the same architecture shaped by firelight, by seasons, by the slow rhythm of walking long distances in search of food. Your stress response was tuned by their dangers. Your cravings were shaped by their scarcity. Your need for closeness, for the sound of another person breathing nearby, was built around fires that burned 50,000 years ago. The brain dimming its vigilance just enough to rest, trusting that the fire would hold and that the others would keep watch. That trust is still with you. It's older than language. It's older than art. It's older than the species you belong to. At Shanidar, 50,000 years ago, a deaf man with one arm and a ruined leg lived to old age because his people chose to carry him. At Sunghir, 34,000 years ago, a child made a small ivory disc with clumsy hands and placed it in a grave beside another child. At Ohalo II, 23,000 years ago, someone gathered soft grass and laid it in a circle around a fire, making a place to rest. Those moments are very far away, and they are not far away at all. If you are still listening, let yourself drift now. The same quiet that settled over those ancient camps is here tonight. Good night from Bedtime Science.